Hello and welcome back to Ready Steady DIY. If it's your first time here, thank you for joining us. If you've already subscribed, thank you for subscribing. Today on the channel, I'm going to talk about different ways you can connect devices to televisions. We're going to start in the late 70s with the Atari 2600 and work our way all the way up to the HDMI connector. I don't think I'll be able to talk about every connection ever made, but today we're going to go over the major ones. If you've ever looked at the back of your television set and felt a little anxiety not knowing what each connector does or why it's there, this video could be for you. We got a lot to talk about today, so let's get going. So because I have an interest in vintage gaming, to me, the first important connection that needs to be discussed, I think, is the RF input terminal that you find on the backs of many televisions. Back in the day, 1977, when the Atari 2600 was invented, this input terminal was on the back of every television. It was there because that's how you connected your antenna. You'd have some giant antenna thing stuck up on your roof. You'd run a coaxial cable from that antenna, and you'd screw it into the back of your television and you'd watch television. When cable television became possible, they used the same connector. And when other accessories became more popular with consumers, the connector was used again. You'd see this on the back of VCRs. You'd see it on the back of a lot of accessories that would feed signals to television sets. It was the method through which the Atari 2600, the ColecoVision, the Coleco Gemini, this was the primary method with which they connected to television sets. It was popular because it was inexpensive, it was threaded, so once you screwed it on, it wasn't coming off. It had a really small footprint, so the makers of devices could fit it onto the back of just about anything. But most importantly for consumers, it combined both video and audio into one cable. Basically, your Atari was broadcasting a signal, an RF signal, from itself on channel 3 or whatever you selected out to the television set. You'd tune your television set to that channel and you would see and hear both picture and sound. I think that this connection gets a really bad rap, and I think that that's not entirely fair. These days we tend to think of it as a really terrible way to connect a device to a television set. We tend to think of it as being snowy or grainy or soft, but it really is just about tuning the television set to the device. If you do that well, you can get a pretty good clear picture through the RF input terminal on a television set. It's possible. It's just a little tough. But eventually people got tired of having just one RF input connector on the back of their television sets and having to switch between cable television and their Atari or their VCR, whatever it was. There was an appetite for a different kind of connector. You've probably seen this kind of cable before. It's a very standard kind of cable. The ends all have RCA plugs on them. Typically you would see one red, one white, one yellow. The red is the right channel of audio, the white is the left channel of audio, and the yellow is for video, composite video. This method became really popular with video game systems and other devices that you could watch movies with because pretty much every time you plugged it into your television set, you'd get the same thing. With RF, it was really prone to interference, and sometimes you'd plug it in, you wouldn't see exactly the same thing you did yesterday or last week. Composite is pretty reliable. It's not that it can't suffer from interference or line loss if the cable is too long, but it is a fairly reliable way to convey a signal from an accessory to your television set. It's also really simple. You'll note here that unlike with RF, the audio and the video were separated. Basically, when you're talking about connections, anytime you can separate the components of a signal and give them their own pipe, you're going to do a little bit better in terms of image and audio quality. Kind of the same way a highway that has more lanes can just get more traffic through, a cable that has more lanes inside of it can get more information through to whatever device you're monitoring the signal on, in this case, a television. So by splitting the audio channels up, you get a left and a right signal, you get a stereo effect, and you allow the video signal to have its own pipe, which generally and usually improves the video quality over using an RF connector in most cases. The RCA connector was also really popular. It had been around since the late 30s. It was also very small. You could line up a whole bunch of these on the back of a receiver or a television set, and you wouldn't have to worry about having a massive footprint or having the plugs interfere with each other. Composite signals were a reliable, repeatable way of taking a standard definition feed into your television. By the early to mid 80s, there was an appetite for something a little bit better. And as the Commodore 64 came to market, they were experimenting with something that I think is kind of innovative. They took the video signal and separated two components of it into its own connectors. They took the luminance part of the signal, or the brightness part of the signal, and they took the chrominance part of the signal, or the color part of the signal, and gave each of those their own pipe into the monitor. Because they made the monitor and the computer, they could experiment with this kind of thing. And the result is a palpable increase in image quality. Over the composite signal that was so popular and common, you really do see a difference. If you've ever seen this kind of connector, an SVideo connector, basically this technology mirrors that idea. SVideo definitely outlasted the Commodore 64, so obviously Commodore was onto something. But then there was a technological advancement that creates a big conundrum for people who made video games or accessories to watch movies on. It was the creation of HD television. Everything had to change when that was brought in. Television sets were showing a different shape of picture. They were showing a rectangular picture instead of mostly a square picture. They were showing much higher resolutions. They were showing a different color space. And there was a lot more information that needed to get to a high definition television if you were going to play your video game or watch your movie in that format. So historically speaking, the first method that we turned to, we used component cables. Component video cables take the video signal and divide it into 3 separate lanes. One being the luminance portion, or the brightness of the signal. The other 2 comprise the blue difference and the red difference portions of the chrominance signal. Basically, we're taking the color portion of the image and splitting it into 2 parts again. By giving the video signal 3 pipelines into your television set, we allow for more information to make it there and create a better image. It's really worthwhile to take a look at the component video cable for the first Xbox. I think that cable is pretty amazing. Microsoft did something pretty smart. They made one connector on the back of the Xbox. It had a multitude of pins kicking out of it. When you bought your Xbox originally, it came with this cable, which is a composite cable. So as you can see, it has the Xbox connector on one end. On the other end, you see a yellow and then a red and then a white RCA connector. This is a very simple and basic way people could connect their Xbox to their television set and see a standard def representation of the video games. But the problem for Microsoft, not everybody owned a standard def television set. Many people had already taken the leap into high definition television and they wanted to watch the games in HD. So in that case, you would go back to the store, you would buy this particular cable. It was a fairly expensive cable at the time, the component video cable for the Xbox. It had the same connector on the back that would plug into the same Xbox, but different pins were active in that connector. And this connector can feed both a composite signal with audio, as you can see here, the yellow, the red, and the white RCA connections are there. But it also could feed component video. You see on this side of the cable split, there's a red, a green, and a blue RCA connector. So on the back of my television here, I've got those connected up, and I'm using the 2 audio cables as well to feed what at the time was considered pretty advanced HD video to an HD television with audio. Or what's great about this cable, it's pretty cool. They have this little sneaky plug here, which outputs optical audio, and they sent you that cable too. So if you wanted to connect your Xbox to your television in all of its glory, 720p, you could connect the red, the green, and the blue RCA cables to the back and then run this optical cable out to your stereo and you'd hear optical sound. It was a pretty good combination. Over the years, a lot of companies have done this. They've created a multi-pin output on the back of their device, knowing that different consumers would have different needs and different television sets, different stereo systems that they would want to monitor the video and audio coming out of the device with. And then they would just provide different cables that would provide different outputs. Kind of ingenious. But as you can imagine, from a marketing perspective, from a consumer perspective, ease of use perspective, the world needed a different kind of cable. One that could shrink this mess down, keep all of these lanes in the highway with just one plug. Enter the HDMI cable. HDMI stands for High Definition Multimedia Interface. It transfers uncompressed, high definition digital video and audio down the same cable. That's not to say it's mushing all of that into one. It keeps them separate. It's just a more advanced cable with a lot of little tiny highways buried inside of it. And that way you could get a full high definition experience on your television set. You could get all kinds of audio experiences depending on the kind of stereo system or receiver you had. Makers also liked it because they could put HDCP technology into it, which protected the signal against piracy. But consumers really like this kind of cable because it's one cable. Plug your modern day Xbox in, your computer, whatever it happens to be, and just go. It just works. So that's an introduction to some of the major methods of connection. There were, of course, lots of them. Methods of connection that were used in Europe, methods of connection that became popular in the audio world, but not the video world. There's professional methods of connection that basically do the same thing, but use different connectors that are a little more robust and lock a little better. We can talk about those in future videos. This is just meant as an introduction to what's on the back of your TV in case it's overwhelming you. So in the end, I hope that helped you out. If it did, please feel free to like or subscribe. Liking and subscribing can really help a channel, and if you did that for this channel, I'd really appreciate it. But until next week, take care, stay safe, have fun with your DIY projects, go play some Xbox, and I'll see you next Saturday.